live now, almost. Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello everyone, it's Muhammad Ishan Dakhi with you, joining you from Hub of Finance Transformation, Dubai. First of all, we warmly welcome you to this exciting webinar on how the global economy can be transformed with Islamic finance and economics that is brought to you by HOFT. HOFT, actually, that is the global community of accounting and finance professionals, or we can say mid to senior level accounting finance professionals like CFOs, controllers, head of finance, who are aspiring to transform their careers, their finance functions, and who are aspiring to make a difference in their lives and in the lives of other people. So that's what we are, a global community of finance professionals. And the topic that we are going to cover today is really very important and very relevant topic. As you know, we are going through turbulent times, through unprecedented economic challenges, challenge of inflation, humanitarian crisis, Ukraine-Russia war, as we all know, and its impact on our global economy and supply chain. So there are lots of challenges that we are unprecedented challenges, we can say, after we recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's what we will try to understand today in our discussion with Mufti Farhad Adam, who has already joined us from UK. We will try to understand some of the solutions that can be brought by the Islamic finance and economics to these challenging times. So we will just cover some of the basic area, first of all, on what is Islamic finance and what is Islamic economics, and then we will understand how it can be applied to the current economic situation and how it can be leveraged to give benefit to the entire world or to the entire global economic and ecosystem that we are operating in. So that's what we are going to discuss, and we will try to make it in a more structured way, as we already have some questions that we are going to ask from Mufti Farhad Adam. So Mufti Farhad Adam, he is the director at Global Sharia advisory firm Amana Advisors, based out of in the UK, United Kingdom, and he also has a passion for Islamic finance, fintech, and Islamic economy. And if you are on LinkedIn, most of you are already following him on LinkedIn. He shared some amazing content, and the beauty of his content is he shared all things within the concept of Sharia, and he addresses always some of the current economic and societal challenges that we have, and he tried to solve it within the you can say the domain of Islamic Sharia and Quran and Sunnah. So that's what the beauty of his content is. He applied 14, some people think that it is a 1400 years old content, and that's what he proved, like how it can be applied to such modern challenges that we are facing. So that's what we are going to cover. Some of the areas today. Of course, we cannot cover everything. So if you would like to connect with him later on, you can connect with him through the LinkedIn or through his contact on his website, Amana Advisors, for any further areas of interest that he has passionate about. So without any further ado, now let's go to our first questions. First of all, Mufti Faraz, thank you very much for joining with us.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's an honor and a privilege to be on this esteemed panel and platform of yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. So let's start with a very basic question. Of course, many people know about the Islamic finance and economic. So let's first start with the very basic question and understand how it little bit differentiate with our conventional finance as well. So what is Islamic finance, Mohammed?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's a very important question that before discussing global challenges and transformation, we understand the very basics of what we want to transform with, right? So if we want to transform the world with Islamic finance, we have to be super clear on what it is that we're talking about, right? And what are the building blocks of this proposition which we want to present to the world and hopefully bring benefit to the world. So Islamic finance, there's so many technical definitions up there. I don't want to delve into the technical definitions because this is not an academic, but it's more of an informal get together as I see it. But if I was to describe Islamic finance in a more casual and informal way, I would say that it's financing with mutual benefit at heart. That's what Islamic finance is about, right? Islamic finance is financing with mutual benefit at heart, meaning at the core of the matter is how can both parties benefit? No one party should be disadvantaged at the expense of the other, right? No one party should be feeling that they've been, their rights have been unjustly appropriated, right? Both parties should feel they're getting the full value of the transaction. So Islamic finance, that's where it differs. Where from a philosophical lens, it's positioned to benefit both parties, not just one party, right? And it has very clear principles to drive that agenda forward. Whereas if we look at the conventional system, it's not underpinned by any divine or any kind of governing framework, which we can say objectively from our lens is taking consideration of both parties. So from our lens and our perspective, Islamic finance is very much a way to ensure the different parties and the different stakeholders that you have engaging in this system and engaging in business, in transactions, in investments, that every single party, their rights are upheld, they are not unjustly enriched, and they are all receiving maximum value that their position can bring them. That for me is Islamic finance, right? And therefore, I think it's very key to note Islamic finance is not just for Muslims. Okay. Many a time we think Islamic finance is only for Muslims. That's not the case, right? Islamic finance is for everybody. Okay, it's the tools that we've been given in our Sharia to be able to fulfill our economic needs on a day-to-day basis. This is the kind of methodology we've been given, or the apparatus and the equipment and the tools that we've been given, these different products, structures, vehicles, transacting codes and manuals. These are the ways which we've been taught from the Sharia that how every person and party can fulfill their needs in a manner which is most ethical, most truthful, just, fair, balanced, and equitable, which is key, right? So it's not always about equality, rather it's about equity here, making sure every single person receives what's best in their best interest. But fundamentally, there's a baseline which the Sharia draws, that nothing can go below this baseline, right? So there must be that baseline, and that's where everything starts from, which is the baseline of fairness, the baseline of equity, of justice. So it's just to wrap up and sum up then, Islamic finance is a form of financing. When we say a form of financing, by its definition, refers to credit transactions. Right? Finance, by its definition, is financing, where one party is lending or one party is investing or providing funds to be repaid on a deferred basis. And that's very key to understand, because the entire Islamic finance works on that basis, right? Because it's financing. So that's why whether it's home financing, car financing, or you're financing through the capital markets, through sukuk, or other structures, or other products, financing by its very essence means that one party will be paying on a deferred basis. So Islamic finance, therefore, is a system of financing where the mutual benefit of both parties is at heart. And it's not just for Muslims, it's for everybody. And all I would say is that should suffice on the first question on what is Islamic finance. I don't want to go too much because I know there's loads of questions still to go through.
Yeah, exactly. I think you gave a very nice overview of the Islamic finance. I think the key areas that you mentioned, first of all, it's for the mutual benefits of both parties rather than benefiting or just a particular sector or particular segment of the economy. I think that's the one of the key feature. And the other thing is it's for everyone. Like it's not only for the Muslims. I think even there are many non-Muslim countries who are also trying to leverage Islamic finance. And of course, we can further, once we go forward with this webinar, we can understand its benefits and also how we can leverage them. Very nicely, I think you covered this area. So the next question that we can move on is, what is Islamic economy and how it differs from the traditional conventional economy, we can say?
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant point. And I mean, look, people might ask the question that even the conventional finance benefits the borrower, right? He's benefiting because he gets a loan. So what makes Islamic finance any better? Well, when you talk about what is benefit, you have to understand what benefit is then, right? You have to break down the word benefit. Or even though the borrower in a conventional product receives funding and cash, from our lens and our worldview, and rather you could say we can look at historical practice now as well, and even previous nations and philosophers. Everybody was of this view and is of this view that when you have a balance or a relationship between lender and borrower, wherein there is interest being paid on one side, it skews the balance. There's an imbalance in that relationship, because human beings, for them to be subjected to paying interest is skewing the natural order of transactions. See, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the world as a system, the world has an order, right? That order, interest, it creates an imbalance in that order, right? This is an artificial, unnatural way to transact. And there's many reasons why that is the case. And maybe today is not the seminar to go into that. But to understand from our perspective, the moment and in the entire conventional finance, every single product is based on lending with interest. Whether you call it trade financing, whether you call it supply chain financing, whether you call it invoice factoring, every product is premised on the concept of interest and lending. Now, all of that interest, riba, just to put it very briefly, it's the core thing which Allah in the Quran has waged war against. And you'd ask the question that why would Allah wage war or declare war against those who deal in interest? Because the reason is the impact of riba is civilizational. The impact of riba is global because it permeates a system. So the response from Allah is also civilizational. What do I mean by that? It's you don't declare war against a person. So if I have enmity with somebody, or if I want to challenge somebody, I won't say to him, no, I'm going to have a war with you. We don't say that in English, right? War is declared by nation against nation, right? People against people, it's groups. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a civilizational response, declares war because riba has a civilizational impact, right? Now, coming to Aquarian economics, see, you have to understand economics or economy, it really comes down to a philosophy, right? There's an Islamic economic thought, just like how we have different schools of economics, like we have the Austrian school as an example, the neoclassical, the classical, right? Keynesian economics. These are all thoughts, right? Schools within economics where there's a particular worldview on how money, finance, and really, you could say all resources should be managed. not just money, all resources should be managed, produced, distributed, right? So even from a Sharia perspective, and from the Quran and Sunnah and the Sharia, we have guidance on economic practice. There is a philosophy within there on resource management, resource allocation, resource distribution, resource production, right? What are the factors of production? The Quran guides towards this, right? What is money? Which is a huge discussion. The money that we have today, is that sound money from a Sharia perspective, right? Is it okay to print money continuously? Is it okay to have this magic money tree from a Sharia lens, right? Why was it that the Sharia endorsed gold, right? Why is it the Messenger of Allah, he endorsed and allowed that practice to take place, right? Gold and silver to be the media of currency and modes of payment and the standard in his era. And it was the case for several centuries until just recently, right? In the last century, where gold was completely delinked and disconnected from the currencies that are in play today. So these are questions of economic thought. And so Islamic finance is underpinned by these questions. And these questions are inquiries which must take place, right? To be able to guide Islamic finance, because financing are just transactions, they're structures, right? But how do you guide that in a manner which benefits humanity, society? And why is it? Look, because people ask this question. I don't know if you've ever heard this question, like, Islamic finance is there, but I don't benefit. I'm not seeing any benefit for Islamic finance. The average person in the street doesn't feel this benefit. I tell them the reason is twofold. Number one, it's that Islamic finance is still in its infancy, in all truth and all honesty. Number two, there's two types of Islamic finance, right? And I've created this kind of like dichotomy. One is institutional Islamic finance, and one is grassroots Islamic finance, okay? Institutional Islamic finance is the Islamic finance we see amongst banks and institutions and capital markets, where the normal person in the street, the everyday person, he doesn't have no kind of engagement with. But then there's grassroots Islamic finance, which is what you and I would see on a day-to-day basis. So your business being riba-free, having the right manners, ethics, the transactions are Sharia compliant, and then even fintechs now, which are more kind of startup, more grassroots, organic organizations, and not institutions per se, which are imposed and on an ivory tower. So Islamic finance has both these types of institutions, and we're seeing now more and more of this grassroots effort taking place and growing. And that's where you and I and many other participants in the economy are experiencing what Islamic finance is all about. So just to wrap up on this question of economics, Islamic economics, economics is a social science, right? Of course, the Islamic framework will have the scientific approach as well, right? Of analyzing, of understanding, of the normative and the positive elements of what an economy should be, what it ought to be, what it is, analyzing, and how we can get to where we want to be. So from an economic kind of a scientific approach, that's there. But more importantly, it's the philosophy, right, which is the underpinning thought. What's the economic thought of Islam in terms of, as I said, resources, in terms of state ownership? What's the role of the state and the government in an economy, right? What is money? What should money be, right? Do people have freedom to contract? Should there be any barriers to entry to the markets? What about taxation, right? What should fiscal policy be like? Monetary policy, right? How does that all work? Should there be some kind of centralization of things? These are all economic inquiries and they're philosophical investigations, right? And that's what Islamic economics deals with and tries to present an alternative system to the world in light of the Quran and Sunnah, which we believe is the fairest approach and is beneficial for everyone, not just Muslims.
Yeah. I think, yeah, perfectly. What you explained is, I think, really it's nailed it. You nailed it, I think. And as you mentioned, I think it's the full ecosystem that the Islam give the framework. It's not only about any particular segment or any particular sector, and it's the complete ecosystem, as you mentioned, including the fiscal policy, the monetary policy, the ways of dealing. So this takes us, I think, very well to our next question, because many people, obviously, who are trying to understand it further, they want to know what are some factors within Islamic finance that can help the global financial industry. And obviously, as we all know, it's going through a turbulent times and lots of challenges. So what are those, you can say, the key factors within Islamic finance that can help the global financial industry and solve the problems that we are facing today?
Yeah, I mean, I would put it down to two things, right? If you could, let's just combine Islamic finance and Islamic economics together, the benefits of Islamic finance and Islamic economics would be, number one is the whole view from a Sharia perspective on what money is. This is, I think, key and fundamental to the discussion, because today we have an inflation currency being played in every country, right? Which and money is the money to the economy is like blood to the body, right? Which is very important to understand that. And that money to the economy is like blood to the body. If the money is corrupted, then the entire system will be corrupted, right? And we have to ask ourselves the question: is there a problem, and why are now we talking? Why is the world talking about central bank digital currencies? Why are we slowly questioning the monetary system that we have, right? Why do we have problems? Why do we have countries whose inflation skyrockets in this hyperinflation, and the currency plummets overnight, such that a person may have had savings of millions and becomes completely worthless the next day? These are problems. These are imbalances at an extreme level. So the first question is the question of money, right? And from an Islamic perspective, such a system, Islam has a very clear, I would say, a very clear presentation on what money ought to be for an economy. It should be hard money, something where the stock to flow ratio, meaning any money that's there, it shouldn't be something which can be easily produced, because it cannot remain as a store of value long term if it's produced very easily. If it can be printed out of thin air, it's a problem. If money is being created by private banks, which is the case, like in the UK, I think the statistics is like 97% of money in circulation is created from private banks. It's not even a central bank which issues money, right? So if money is created by credits and lending, that means money is an IOU, a debt, right? Which is charging and accruing interest, which is problematic from a Sharia perspective already. Now, this money is printed, inflation continuously. Every year we have targets to deal with inflation, but everybody's now feeling the heat of this, right? There's debasement. It's a form of debasement of currency as well. Now, from a Sharia perspective, is that acceptable? What does Sharia say? Sharia has a very clear stance, as I mentioned, on having against inflationary currencies, against the printing, against manipulation of currencies, against just having this, because classically the government or the authorities would not be able to simply just print money, right? You'd have to mine gold. You'd have to mine some kind of whatever you're using. It typically was gold, but you'd have to create a supply. You'd have to put in effort to create that return or those funds. It can't simply be printed. And therefore, if a government or authority wanted to do anything, if it wanted to raise taxes from people, it could only do so much as it receives. It can't simply go and print money, right? So if a government, if I'm the government today, as an example, I can only do according to how much I take from the people. Okay, I can't go and simply get printed money or borrow money from the central bank, right? And just get it printed and do what I want and run a budget deficit. You can't do that, because you're borrowing. So therefore, I have to prove to the people that I'm serving the interests, because they will not give me money if I can't serve the interests, right? So philosophically, the question of money is key, because it plays down to the entire system, right? That's number one. Number two, I think, is debt. The issue of debt, the issue of trading in debt, which is also a huge problem. We've seen the global financial crisis in 2008. Why did it take place? Well, I mean, amongst the many drivers, many reasons, of course, one key to the entire problem, the subprime mortgages problem, was the selling of debt of mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps, right? This exacerbated the entire problem of the global financial crisis in 2008. And that's what created this kind of systemic risk that we saw. And we saw banking institutions, on the surface, they were completely disconnected. But because of these links through these toxic and junk, you could say investments, if you can call them investments, it created havoc across the world, right? So trading in debt is prohibited from a Sharia perspective. That would have reduced the exposure, and that's why there is some data available on the impact of Islamic banks. How were Islamic banks exposed? They were not as exposed as conventional banks because an Islamic bank can't have these assets on their balance sheet, right? So that's number two. And number three, I'd like just to say is in the entire concept which we know about riba, right, which is key. Riba is the primary problem. Right? Riba is the primary problem from a Sharia perspective, which Islam has come and sees as the greatest, because like Imam Sarakhsi, rahimahullah, famous jurist, he mentioned that ultimately there are just two types of transactions. One which is halal, which is known as bay, and one which is haram, which is known as riba, right? Riba is very broad and comprehensive. It covers many areas. Riba is not only the technical side, but it has many other angles to it. So that's what I'd like to suffice with, that this is how Islamic finance can really change the world that we have. I mean, and I've just given you some examples of how it could make a tangible difference if it was practiced globally.
Okay, great. I think, yeah, that's really a great point as you mentioned about the crisis. And I think we are all, again, I think the next economic crisis is already on our head, I believe. And of course, the reason behind any prohibition of riba, of course, it should be very clear now to the world, like why it's prohibited, and we can see its consequences throughout the world. So the next question that comes is, what are some of the elements of the Islamic economy that will help the world, or that can help them to, get out of this economic challenges or the crisis that we are facing today?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much of continuing from I would say the previous question. Then it's about understanding the role of money. What should money be in a society, and what kind of money serves all our interests, which is key, right? Because that is at the heart of the discussion. What's the role of debt, right? If we adopt the Islamic view on debt, and then financing with debt, right, and lending, but what's the role of lending? See, from an Islamic perspective, which we don't see in practice much nowadays in terms of the conventional markets and the system that we live in, is the markets or transactions are not just merely economic interactions, right? From an Islamic perspective, transactions are more than just financial transactions or financial exchange. Transactions are social exchanges. That's why Sharia encourages and actually has guidance on how we should behave and how we should deal with the counterparty when we're engaged in a transaction. That proves and shows to us that from a Sharia lens, a transaction or an exchange is much more than just a give and take of money and asset, or supply of goods and services and payment. Rather, it's an entire exchange. And that's why if we follow the Sunnah, how the Messenger of Allah, he practices transactions, how he dealt with people, how he exchanged. Why are there teachings for that? Because it's key, it's fundamental to show us that these interactions are not just purely about receiving what you want to buy, but it's much more than that. And what is it then? It's about creating a community, a society, because you might have all the money in the world, but if the community around you is disenfranchised, it's disjointed, it's disconnected, there's problems, there's issues, you will not be able to benefit from your money the way that money should benefit you, because there'll be so many barriers, obstacles. There might not be safety. There might not be security. There might be chaos outside. There might be looting, plundering. There may be fighting. There might be all sorts going on. So economic chaos. So all that comes from what? The transaction, because the economy is made up of multiple millions of cogs, right? These round circles that keep moving. What are those cogs? Is transactions between two people. And these transactions are taking place millions of times every single day. And then that makes an economy. So if you have two people arguing, fighting, or their rights are not being fulfilled, there's riba in there, there's jahala, ignorance, ambiguity, gharar, uncertainty, lying, cheating, fraud, deception, all these things, you're going to create a very fractured system, a very unstable, volatile system. Any place, if anything cracks, it can crack the entire thing. That's why Sharia has very clear guidances. So therefore, I mean, beyond just these, removal of riba, reducing debt exposure, amending, I would say, the monetary policy and monetary standard, I think what's key that Islam brings to the table, which is key that can be implemented from today, is the guidance on character, on how we behave with counterparties, payment on time, right? Which is such a big deal today that unfortunately we have people who just don't pay their workers on time, right? Being honest in your job, being faithful, being loyal, right? Being transparent, being accountable, being somebody who's responsible. These are missing across the board, wholesale, in almost every single industry. That's the greatest value add which Islamic finance or Sharia brings and can change people. If we were to just adopt those teachings, we'd all see the benefits of that.
Yeah, I think exactly as you mentioned, it's not only about the riba, but of course there are lots of factors. And I think the people, even if you talk about the organizations that we are working in, people, they are, I think, the key strategic asset of any organization. And I think the Sharia, I think it all focuses on how you should deal with the people, right? As you mentioned, like paying your suppliers, your vendors on time, paying your employees on time, dealing with them fairly, of course, then they will be more productive. And of course, they can contribute to the whole economy. So I think it's much broader in scope, exactly. So Mufti, for us, the next question, I think we are moving towards our last question. Then we will have some Q&A with our audience who are, I think some people already joined here. Some are from our social media. We will take as much question as possible during our Q&A. So the final question that we are moving toward is, as you know, the world of economy and the whole ecosystem that we are operating is more of a conventional system. So obviously all these concepts that you talk about, really it makes sense. But in order to transform or transition from the conventional or traditional economy or finance to Islamic economy, obviously there will be lots of challenges. So what do you think are some of those challenges in the adoption of the Islamic finance economists in your view?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a very important question, because only when we start pondering and contemplating on these questions can we begin to think of some solutions and then develop strategies to actualize those solutions. So I would say number one, which is key, is education. I think education is fundamentally missing across the entire industry, across all the continents. We just don't have enough education in Islamic finance. No matter all the noise that's being made, no matter all the courses, all the websites, all the articles, all the webinars, in all honesty, majority are still, I would say, unaware, or not, I would say not unaware, but not impressed or not sold on the idea of Islamic finance. Right? Why is that the reason? Well, why is that the case? That is because we've not been able to, those in the industry, we've not been able to explain Islamic finance and Sharia and what we're trying to do in plain English for every single person to understand. Because finance is a very technical, jargon-loaded subject, right? It's very boring for some, in all honesty. Finance is very boring for many people. Although they are impacted on a daily basis All right, on an hourly basis, they're impacted by the economy and the financial markets and what's happening around them. But people don't care and people don't want to know. So why would somebody who's in their 40s, who's got a full-time job, family, happy, why would he want to know about all of this? Right? He's getting his money, he's working, he's paying his bills, he's having a good time. People don't want to know, right? So why is it important? That's why education is key, because what we don't want and what many people miss is, if your money is not in the Islamic economy, your money is circulating in the riba economy, which is, I think, a huge problem from my perspective. You are strengthening indirectly harmful companies, harmful services. Your money is circulating in those areas which are completely prohibited. We are strengthening financially, right? We're increasing the assets under management in terms of riba institutions, right? Our funds are being used then, if we're not conscious of Islamic finance, to support such companies which are not Sharia compliant. So number one, I would say education is absolutely key, and not only just education on products and structures, rather the very basics. What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to do? What is Islamic finance all about? Yes, of course, it'll have its hiccups because we have regulatory challenges, we have banking law challenges, we have legal challenges, right? We have economic challenges. We're working within systems already in place and embedded in these countries that we live in. It's a system of so many hundreds of years. We have competition, crazy competition that we're dealing with. We're a minority in certain countries trying to make things change. We have then these risks that we have, multiple risks when it comes to dealing with these matters. So all these factors and challenges will always make us try and pivot continuously to find the right solution. So it's not the ready-made product. We're still in the infancy, we're still growing, but that is much better than to be in a position where we say, no, this is not Sharia, all this is riba. Some people make this assumption and claim that the entire Islamic finance is just a riba hidden, right? They say profit, but really it's a riba, it's interest. That is scary because that's certainly not the case. But even if we made small changes and we moved that slight percentage away from riba, or that one step away from riba, that's a big thing. That's a big thing, because rather than just surrender and submit to riba, we rather try our best to create an alternative. An alternative can only be developed and come to fruition over many years. It's not going to happen overnight. So it's slow changes. Our job is to simply move the needle 1 degree in the right direction. If we can move it more than 1 degree, excellent. But we just got to try our best to make things right and move things along, and to grow and to show the world a different place. And people will start adopting when they see the benefits. So we need to work on education. I think have high hope, high aspirations, which is key, because the psychological and behavioral side of human beings is very important. I think then number 3, more participants are needed in the Islamic finance economy, right? And then number 4, capital. Capital is a huge problem. The lack of capital for Islamic startups, right? Fintech startups, for Islamic financial institutions, that's another whole issue, right? And I would say, I would say from my perspective, these are the key challenges.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Mufti Farhad. I think the point that you raised about the education, I think that's really the important part. And if we see in even our professional accountancy qualifications and finance qualification, like chartered accountancy, CPA, CCA, you see very limited. Even in some profession, there is not at all. There is coverage of Islamic finance economy, and if in some regions very limited, coverage is there on Islamic finance and economy. That's why, as you told people, if they are not aware what is Islamic finance, so obviously how they can apply it in their lives, in their corporate lives, in the economy, or obviously in the roles that they're performing. So I believe that's really, I think, one of our efforts through this webinar as well, to spread the awareness. I think you really covered really important points during this initial 30 minutes. So, Mufti Faraz, I believe there are so many questions I can see in the chat box on our social media because many people have joined us. So, let's pick some of the questions.
Yeah, sure.
And the first question is from Tariq. In terms of payment on time, how Sharia deals with defaulter of debt who may not default willfully?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Look, the reality is, unfortunately, there will be people in default, right? That's the sad reality. At times it's intentional, many times it's unintentional, right? Now, when it's unintentional, Sharia gives guidance to the creditors and those who are owed receivables. So whether you've given a loan to somebody or whether you've invested with somebody and they don't pay you your dividends or the returns on time, which are due to you, like the investments reached maturity, they now have to pay you, but they're not paying you. How do you deal with that situation and scenario? Because you own that money. So when it comes to the debtors, right? First, let's discuss about debtors. Those who owe you money, there's an obligation for them to pay. It's not just a simple return of investment, rather they owe you a return. Then it's a loan, as an example. Then the Sharia is very clear that first we have to do everything we can. We have to give them a grace period, grant them time, and understand the problem, understand this situation. What is it? فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. The Quran encourages us and guides us towards granting some grace period, some time, understanding the problem with the person, the situation. So there's this kind of human interaction already. Like, what's the problem? This kind of brotherhood, sisterhood, trying to understand each other's problems, working together to solve the problem. And then, if that doesn't work, then either you write you off as a creditor or as a creditor, or you wait, or you can do a hawala transaction, meaning you can assign the debt to somebody else, or you can call on a guarantor. You can have somebody else come and pay on behalf of the a debtor. Of course, the prudent thing and what's practiced in the industry is to have multiple forms of securing the obligation. What do I mean by that? Well, when a debt is owed, there's multiple things you can do. You can have a promissory note, you can have a check, a post-dated check, you can have assets placed as collateral, you can have certain options placed in a contract that's known as khiyarun naqd. You can also have guarantors in place. You can have debt assignments in place. These are all securities and ways to secure the rights of the creditor, so that if there was default, then the creditor would not lose out, because there's alternative mechanisms to address the problem. And of course, another situation that's used, or another kind of tool that's used in the arsenal of, you could say, tools that are there to prevent default. One is the undertaking, which is used quite predominantly with Islamic financial institutions. So along with like a personal guarantee, a charge on assets, collateral, an undertaking is taken place, a wa'ad. And this undertaking is a person simply saying, if I default, I will cover your expenses, your actual expenses as a result of the default, and I commit to pay X amount. So the actual expense of default will be covered, and the company will use those funds to cover the expenses. The surplus and whatever's remaining, the net, will then be given in charity. So it's working as a deterrent, right? Because the whole point is we want to deter default. We don't want to penalize. We want to deter default, right? So that's why there's all these different mechanisms in play in the Islamic finance industry to kind of help the debtor not default. And if there is default, then how we can reduce the kind of burden on the debtor.
That's great. I think that's a very good and comprehensive, answer, Tariq, to your questions. Thank you for us. Now, the next question is from Shehbaz. He asking, do you think blockchain can be the biggest enabler of Islamic finance because of the transparency and immutable smart contracts? And can you give some examples of how blockchain technology is and can be leveraged by Islamic financing institutions?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not really so convinced yet that blockchain is a solution to every problem. Rather, I don't think it is. Blockchain is helpful in those systems and those kind of practices where multiple international parties are involved, You need real-time data, real-time access. Everybody needs that kind of visibility. And there's so many moving parts, right? But transparency, multiple stakeholders are involved. That's where I think blockchain may play a part. But until now, I'm not convinced of blockchain adding any significant value to the current legacy-based systems that we have. Much of the legacy-based systems that we have right now are functioning perfectly fine. There is transparency in many places. There is, you could say immutability may be a question, no doubt about it. Because it's not tamper-proof. The systems that we have right now, it can be tampered with. But for the most part, the current systems are functioning well and do provide the kind of needs for both parties. But where blockchain can make a difference is, I would say, when it's international kind of collaboration, maybe like in something like syndication, when you have syndicated financing, where you have multiple parties coming in and syndicating and providing a financing instrument to a customer. But beyond that, right now, I'm still not convinced on blockchain as a game changer per se for the legacy-based system, because much more or less everything that the blockchain provides we can do. Yes, it has additional benefits here and there, but the cost of blockchain, I think, is the problem. Like this, human resource is a big issue. Like how many people are experts in blockchain? The cost of that is very high. Then there's risks in terms of adoption. What if something goes wrong, right? Legal risks, right? What's the kind of legalities of many of this, right? Has this been tested in court? Like what would happen if this was taken to court? A smart contract was taken to court. What would be the kind of like ramifications of that? There may be questions on other risks, right, in terms of accounting, in terms of tax, legal, all these things. So these are all areas which no company would want to dive into. Yeah, of course, they'll be flirting with the idea, they'll be experimenting, no doubt. But I don't think blockchain is the holy grail, so to say, to solve every single problem that we may be experiencing.
That's right. Thank you, Faraz. Now, there's one more good question I can see from Sajid. One of the challenges as a Muslim minority country that we face to promote Islamic finance is the competition. Islamic solutions tend to be more expensive and less efficient compared to conventional counterpart. So how do we promote Islamic finance to the mass in such an environment?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very good question. And the reality is, a simple answer is because of economies of scale, right? Because we don't have a critical mass of individuals engaged in the Islamic finance industry, the costs will be more, right? The costs will be passed on to the customers because we don't have the critical mass there. So because of economies of scale, a lack of critical mass, the products overall cannot be offered at a cheaper rate. Typically, it's not always the case, right? But from the brother's perspective, sometimes it is more expensive. There is a premium there because there's additional processes. It's not widely adopted. It's not the norm. So to capture the price of something which is not the norm, there will be a premium there, right? Because if something is normal, it'll be somewhat less and somewhat used to, and the markets will kind of price it accordingly. But that's one thing, economies of scale. The cost of capital is another thing, right? Cost of capital, I mean, acquiring financing. So even if it's a financial institution, they'll have particular costs of funding and financing. How do you cover that? That's passed on to the customer. Again, because it's Islamic finance, it's not mainstream. We still haven't hit that critical mass. Questions of economies of scale. The cost will be passed on to the consumer and the customers. And then, of course, there are some other issues as well, like in terms of contractual obligations and some forms of like the legal costs and these things. And this differs. I mean, I know some Islamic financial providers share costs, right? And some don't. They kind of put the cost onto the customer. So that also adds further weight and further burden on customers because of the nuances involved in a transaction within Islamic finance.
Right. And there is one more question. You said gold has been the currency for all until this century. Does Quran say anything for or against devising a new currency, for example, crypto or any digital currency?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Look, there is no, like Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah and others I've mentioned, there is no defined currency in Sharia. Like Sharia doesn't oblige us to select one currency. But what we do have is very clear principles from Sharia on what money should look like, right, in an economy, in a system. So we're not forced to deal with gold, but from all the forms of money that have existed to date, gold seems, I mean, this is from a Sharia and also a non-Sharia kind of like, just the conventional lens. Gold has been phenomenal, right? Yes, there's objections against gold, but many a times that's because of not understanding the full picture on some of the issues that were raised in the 20th century with gold, right? Now, why was gold a problem? What was it? How was it impacting governments? Why did governments abandon gold? Right? There's a lot of reading to do. I'll say the best book to read on this matter, right, is the Bitcoin Standard. Right, to understand money, from my perspective, that's been a phenomenal book for me to read. When I read that book by Dr. Saifuddin, he explains about what money is, how gold really functioned for all these centuries with data and statistics, and how the gold standard was solving so many problems, and how it really preserved value. Gold was a store of value for centuries, and it's still used, and it's still a store of value. So gold is Sharia has not defined any particular currency or form of money, but it has very clear principles, right? And gold, has and harbors all those principles within it. That doesn't say that if we find something tomorrow which is better than gold or equal to gold or better than gold, it cannot be money or currency. It can be, no doubt about it. But there's certain, I would say, there's certain principles and requirements for something to be a currency and something to be money, a long-term store of value.
Right, perfectly. And I think we can take one last question as we have last, I think, 6 or 7 minutes left. So there is one question from Sajid from Sri Lanka. He's asking, Islamic social finance in digitizing zakat is one of the biggest challenge we face in Sri Lanka is to build the trust element. Donors may not be willing to enter their data or pay their money through a digital platform for various reasons. So how do we initially build that trust?
Governance, good governance, best practice, have some kind of corporate governance involved. Maybe there's an issue with governance, right? It might be the reason, right? That's why there's lack of trust. We need to have accountability, visibility, auditors, external auditing. So if we create all the governance kind of frameworks and checks and balances in place, give optimal kind of visibility to different stakeholders on the operations, have regular reporting on what's happening, then that would build trust. And the main thing is show impact. Impact reporting is key, right? When people see there's actually something taking place, there's impact taking place, people are more likely to support it than not, right? So if you can show impact, if the zakat institution can really show that they're making a difference, show that they're working for the people and with the people, right, for the people, then you build trust, right? Trust is built, and then you have further trust by your frameworks, your governance, your audits, your checks and balances. That will just cement the trust and confidence of the people in the institution.
Yeah, I think that's really the important point is about the governance and the internal control system. So I believe there are lots of questions and there are some specific questions as well. So I would suggest you to you can directly connect with Mufti Faraz Adam through his Sharia advisory firm, Amana Advisors. So you can Google it or you can find it on on him. You can connect him through the LinkedIn as well for any specific questions that you have. So we try to cover some important questions that are more relevant to our today's discussion. So I believe that's where we reach to the end of this webinar, and we are highly thankful to Mufti Faraz for sharing his insights, his wisdom, his knowledge of Islamic finance and economy. And I think it's a very broad area. It's not possible to cover each and every area within one short time of 1 hour. And of course, we will try to schedule some more webinars in the future, inshallah, with on other topical issues that we are facing in our economy and in the corporate world that we are facing. So thank you all the audience for your time, and I think really some of the great questions you asked, and I think very insightful questions. And thank you very much, Mufti Faraz, for your time today.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. It was an honor, a privilege, and thank you to all the participants for taking out time from your busy schedules and enlightening me and having a very warm discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much for us, and have a nice day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.